I can still remember that night like it was yesterday. Everything started unraveling so quickly. I felt like I was watching a nightmare unfold in real time. I had just come home, tossed my shoes aside, and was expecting a quiet evening with my wife, Laura. But from the moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere was off. You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? That's what hit me as soon as I walked through the door. Laura was standing by the kitchen counter, gripping a bottle of wine like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her hands were shaking as she poured herself a glass, and I could tell right away that whatever she had to say wasn't going to be good. As we sat down for dinner, she cleared her throat, her eyes fixed on her plate as if the mashed potatoes were suddenly the most captivating thing in the room. Then, she dropped the bomb. "Adam, I think we need to take a break," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Try open relationships, just for 2 weeks." My mind froze. I put my fork down slowly, trying to process her words. "Wait, are you telling me you want me to let you date someone else?" I barely managed to ask. "It's not like that," she said quickly, almost as if she could sense the panic in my voice. "It's just an experience. We need a little freedom to figure out what's really important." The world felt like it shifted beneath me. I could feel my stomach twisting into knots, my head spinning. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream or just walk out the door and never look back. I kept waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was some twisted joke. But no, her face was dead serious. And that's when it hit me. She had already made up her mind, and I had no say in it. And just like that, my mind was screaming the same question over and over. "Is there already someone else?" I sat there, dumbfounded, unable to form any words. Laura looked almost relieved, like unloading this on me had lifted some weight off her shoulders. Meanwhile, I felt like I had just been sucker punched in the gut. After dinner, I needed to get out of the house for a bit. I grabbed a cigar from the box I kept outside, stepped onto the patio, and lit it. The night air was cool, but I was sweating like a fool. I stared up at the sky, letting the smoke swirl around me as my thoughts spun out of control. Why am I even thinking about this? But then, some stubborn part of me decided not to react right away. Maybe I could keep things cool and see where this was going. Something was off, and if I blew up now, I might never get to the bottom of it. The next day, Laura acted like a completely different person. Suddenly, she was all about self-care. More time in front of the mirror, trying on new outfits, hitting the gym like her life depended on it. And I couldn't help but notice one thing. Her phone was glued to her hand. She was never without it. That was when the uneasy feeling in my stomach got even worse. She was trying too hard to act normal, but I knew her better than that. Every time she texted someone, she'd tilt her phone just slightly, as if she didn't want me to see. I kept my mouth shut for the time being. I wasn't going to start a fight just yet. But if she thought she could play me for a fool, she was in for a rude awakening. I could have confronted her right there, demanded to know who she was texting all the time, but I decided to play it smart. If there was something going on, she'd slip up eventually. They always do. And sure enough, the cracks started to spread. After Laura planted that bomb about an open relationship, I became hyper-aware of everything she did. It was like a sixth sense kicked in, something I'd never relied on before because I trusted my wife. But now, everything felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. She started staying late at work more often. At least, that's what she told me. But here's the thing. Every time she came home, she didn't seem worn out from a long day at the office. No, she'd walk in, smiling, almost glowing, like she'd just been at a spa. And the weirdest part? She never smelled like her office. You know that distinct scent of stale coffee, printer ink, and dry office air? Nothing like that. Instead, there was this faint trace of perfume. A different perfume, not the one she usually wore. I tried not to let it show, but every time she mentioned staying late, I made a mental note of it. I started keeping track of when she left, when she came back, and how long she was out. I didn't say a word. I just kept everything to myself, letting the anger simmer beneath the surface. Then came the night I knew I had to do more than just watch. It was a Thursday, and Laura told me she was going out for drinks with coworkers after work. There was something about the way she said it that didn't sit right with me. So, after she left, I called the restaurant she mentioned, just to check if she was really there. Closed for renovations, the voice on the other end told me. I could feel my blood pressure spike instantly, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. But instead of blowing up her phone or confronting her like a madman, I told myself to hold back. If she was lying, I needed more than just one slip-up. I needed undeniable proof. A few days later, the opportunity one had been waiting for practically landed in my lap. Laura had rushed out of the bathroom, leaving her phone on the sink, something I never thought I'd see. Her phone wasn't glued to her hand, and I wasn't about to waste any time. My heart was pounding as I grabbed it and started scrolling through her messages. That's when I found him. Ethan, a name I had never heard before, but just seeing it made my stomach churn. The conversation was long, full of inside jokes and what seemed like casual flirting, but one message stood out like a flashing neon sign. Laura. I told him about the open relationship, and he agreed. Now we can finally have our night together, just like we planned. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. So this is what she'd been up to. All those late nights, those secret texts. It wasn't freedom she wanted. For a moment, I honestly thought about destroying her phone, just smashing it into 1,000 pieces. But instead, I took a deep breath and pushed the anger back down. If I blew up now, she'd twist everything and play the victim. No, I couldn't fall for that. I needed to think this through. Without hesitation, I synced her phone to mine. It was shockingly easy. In a matter of minutes, I had complete access to everything. Her texts, her photos, every little detail. It was like I was getting a front-row seat to her secret life. I placed the phone back on the counter, just as I heard her voice calling out from the living room. Adam, everything okay? She asked. I kept my voice steady. Yeah, just cleaning up, I replied. I walked back into the living room to find her sprawled out on the couch, scrolling through her social media feed like she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew. I knew exactly what she was up to with Ethan, and I wasn't just going to sit back and watch it happen. For now, though, I kept my cool. There would be a time for confrontation, but when it came, it would hit her like a ton of bricks. I couldn't let Laura think she could mess around with this guy and then come home as if nothing was happening. I'd played by the rules of our marriage all these years, but now? Now it was my turn to break a few. And that's when Tessa popped into my head. Tessa was the neighbor a couple of houses down. The one who was always just a little too friendly. The one who made lingering eye contact and always seemed to throw out compliments with that flirtatious grin. I never thought twice about her before. I was married, after all. But now, things had changed. If Laura wanted to play her little game, I could play too. One night, after Laura left to meet a friend, which I knew was code for seeing Ethan, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen and made my way over to Tessa's. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp, and as I walked up to Tessa's front door, my heart raced. Not from nerves, but from the thrill of finally taking control. When Tessa opened the door, she was wearing a silky robe that hugged her curves just right, and that smile on her face. It told me everything I needed to know. Well, this is a surprise, she said, leaning against the doorframe, her robe shifting slightly as she moved. Brought some wine, I said, holding up the bottle. Thought we could catch up. She laughed, stepping aside to let me in. I was starting to think you'd never ask. We sat down on her couch, the bottle of wine between us, and the conversation flowed as naturally as the drinks. At first, it was just small talk, life in the neighborhood, her latest dating disasters. But with every sip, the air between us grew thicker. I could feel her eyes on me, and when her hand brushed mine, she didn't pull it away. You know, she said, tilting her head with that same teasing grin, I always wondered why you never came over before. I leaned in just a little closer, the warmth of the wine settling into my chest. Maybe I was waiting for the right moment, I said, my voice lowering. Our eyes locked, and before I could even think twice, I felt a pull, something undeniable between us. There was an intensity in the air, full of all the frustration and anger I had been holding in. She looked at me, and I could feel everything building in that moment. Her hands gently brushed against mine, and for a moment, everything else faded. We moved closer, and the air between us was thick with the unspoken words we hadn't said. It wasn't quiet or calm. It was a release of everything that had been building up for so long. When it was over, I lay there, tangled in the sheets, her skin warm against mine. And in that quiet moment, the thought hit me, like a bucket of ice water splashing over my head. I'd always been the one to follow the rules, but since Laura broke them first, why shouldn't I do the same? For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the guy getting walked all over. I felt in control. And damn, it felt good. We lay there, catching our breath, the only sound the soft hum of the ceiling fan above. Tessa turned toward me, her fingers tracing circles over my chest. "Are you going to tell her?" she whispered. I shook my head. "Not yet. There's no need to rush." Laura had no clue what had just happened, and that gave me the upper hand. If she wanted to keep playing her game with Ethan, fine. But now, I had my own game, and I was just getting started. I knew exactly when Laura had set up her little rendezvous with Ethan. I'd seen it all in the messages I'd been monitoring on my phone. Every new text she sent twisted my stomach with rage. Friday night dinner at that fancy downtown bistro. She even mentioned the dress she was going to wear, his favorite. Reading those messages felt almost too satisfying. Like she had no idea I was already ahead of her. She thought she was being clever, sneaking around behind my back, but she had no clue I was 3 steps ahead. I wasn't about to just sit back and watch. I had a plan. Friday night came quicker than I thought. Laura spent the whole afternoon getting ready, acting like she was headed out to some corporate gala. I watched her as she fussed over her makeup, smoothed her hair in the mirror, slipped into that low-cut, tight black dress. She sprayed on perfume, the same scent she hadn't worn in ages, and stood in front of the mirror, making sure everything was perfect. She was practically glowing with excitement, and I could barely stomach it. There she was, the woman who had promised me forever, now dressing up for some other guy. I kept my face neutral, but inside, my blood was boiling. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She hummed as she walked through the kitchen, heels clicking on the floor, checking her phone every few minutes. No doubt texting Ethan. "Want a coffee before you head out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She glanced over her shoulder, flashing me one of those fake smiles she'd perfected over the years. "Sure, just a small one." "Perfect," I said, pulling the small packet from my pocket while the coffee brewed. The laxative was my little secret weapon. Tasteless, odorless, perfect for what I needed. I slipped it into her coffee and handed it to her with a calm expression, watching as she took the cup without a second thought. She sipped slowly, still glowing from the excitement of the night ahead. Sitting at the kitchen island like everything was normal, I leaned against the counter, arms folded, just observing her as she finished the coffee. With each sip, it felt like a small victory. My plan was in motion, and I was ready for the fallout. When she finally got up to leave, she gave me a half-hearted kiss on the cheek. "I'll see you later tonight," she said, sounding like it was nothing. I didn't say much back. "Have fun," I replied, keeping my voice steady, emotionless. She walked out, the door clicking behind her, and I stood there in the silence, waiting. Exactly 45 minutes later, the front door flew open, and there she was, red-faced, breathless, and seething. She kicked off her heels and tossed her purse onto the floor before storming into the living room, muttering curses under her breath. I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It was a disaster," she groaned, her voice muffled. "I don't know what happened. One minute I'm fine, the next I'm running to the bathroom every 5 minutes. It was humiliating." I just nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm sorry, Mel. That sounds awful." She looked up at me, frustration and shame clear in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Adam. I really am. I want things to go back to how they were. Can we do that? Just for a moment?" I pretended to think about it, then walked over and sat beside her. I pulled her into an embrace, and for a second, she relaxed into me, her arms wrapping around my waist. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair softly. "We'll figure it out." But inside, I was grinning. I knew things would never go back to the way they were. That bridge had burned the moment she brought Ethan into our lives. As she clung to me, apologizing over and over, I stared at the clock on the wall. My mind was already moving ahead. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. Things quickly started to unravel. After her disastrous date with Ethan, Laura became a whirlwind of guilt and detachment. She was a walking storm, oscillating between apologizing and retreating into cold silence. I sat back and let her hang herself with her own guilt, watching as everything around us fell apart. The house felt suffocating, thick with the unspoken resentment we both refused to acknowledge. Every little thing became an argument. Things that never mattered before suddenly felt like explosions. Dishes left in the sink. Who was supposed to take the trash out? How I folded the laundry. Every conversation turned passive-aggressive. Even planning something as simple as a weekend outing felt like a battle. "I thought we were going to your parents for dinner," she'd snap, already irritated. "Yeah, well, plans change." I'd bite back, not even bothering to hide my frustration anymore. I watched her mindlessly scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving like she was solving the world's most important problem. And every time I saw her texting, I knew exactly who it was, Ethan. And every time, it reminded me how far gone we were. The final straw came one night when curiosity got the best of me. She was in the shower, and her phone buzzed. Without thinking, I grabbed it. Old habits, I guess. I unlocked it easily, same passcode as always. I shouldn't have been surprised by what I saw, but the gut punch still hit me hard. Another message from Ethan. "Can't wait to see you again." This time, no interruptions. Winking face. I felt the anger rise before I even put the phone down. The shower cut off, and just as I was trying to calm myself, Laura walked out of the bathroom. She saw me holding her phone, and her face went stone cold. "What the hell are you doing with my phone?" she demanded, marching over and yanking it out of my hands. "I'm checking to see how deep the knife in my back is." I shot back, my voice dripping with venom. That was the moment the floodgates opened. "You don't love me anymore, do you?" she shouted, throwing her hands up in the air. "You're not even trying to save us." I crossed my arms, staying cold and unmoving. "Why should I? You're the one who broke us." For a second, I saw real hurt in her eyes. But it didn't matter. That version of me, the guy who cared about her feelings, was long gone. The argument spiraled from there, both of us hurling accusations, throwing everything at each other. There was no coming back from it. I knew it, and so did she. Everything I had been holding back for months came pouring out. "You're not the man I married," she yelled. "And you sure as hell aren't the woman I married." I shot back, each word hitting harder than the last. It was brutal. Every insult felt like gasoline on a fire. By the end, she was in tears, slamming doors and storming around the house, while I just sat there on the couch, numb and exhausted. That night, as I lay awake in bed, something hit me. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if she loved me or hated me. I didn't care if we fixed things, or if our whole marriage burned to the ground. The love I once had for her was gone, snuffed out like a candle. I knew I had to end it, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I'd end it on my terms, when it hurt her the most. It was early the next morning. The house was uncomfortably quiet, like something was about to shift. I was half asleep, tangled in the sheets, hoping for just a few more minutes of peace before I had to face the mess that was my life. But then, the peace was shattered. A knock rattled the front door, sharp, insistent. Not the casual tap of a delivery driver, but something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled to the door. When I opened it, there she stood, Tessa, pale, nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. She just stared at me for a second, like she didn't know how to start. "Tessa?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. She bit her lip, exhaled sharply. "Adam, I'm pregnant. It's yours." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My brain froze, trying to process what she just said. Pregnant? The word hit me like a freight train. I hadn't even considered the possibility, not once. Before I could get my bearings, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. I turned just in time to see Laura standing in the doorway. She was barefoot, wearing one of my old t-shirts, her expression shifting from confusion to pure, unfiltered rage. Her voice cut through the room like a knife. "You slept with her?" she spat. How could you do this to me? Tessa took a nervous step back, glancing between us, but I held my ground. I was done being the nice guy. How could I do this? I shot back, my voice rising. You're the one who started all of this with your open relationship nonsense. You could have said no, she screamed, her face twisting in fury. But no, you had to go screw the first slut you could find. I stepped closer, my words dripping with contempt. Don't stand there pretending you're the victim, Laura. This is exactly what you wanted. Congratulations. You got it. The argument exploded like a volcano. Months of anger, betrayal, and resentment spilled out of both of us. We yelled, we cursed, and we dragged every secret we had been holding onto into the open. You never cared about us. Not really, she shouted, her face flushed with rage. And you cared so much that you couldn't keep your legs closed. I fired back, the words cutting deeper than I intended. We went at it for hours, both of us too stubborn to back down. Each insult felt like a knife twist, each word cutting deeper than the last. The air was thick, suffocating, like the house itself was about to implode. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. This was the endgame. We were just tearing down whatever pieces were left. Finally, I snapped. This marriage was already over, I said, my voice low, but with finality. This just sped things up. The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes welling with angry tears. But she didn't have anything else to say. The next day, I filed for divorce. Walking out of that courthouse felt like shedding a skin I didn't even realize I'd been wearing for years. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest, one I hadn't even noticed was there. A few months later, Tessa and I were preparing to welcome our baby into the world. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it felt right. It felt like a fresh start. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. Not for ending the marriage. Not for being with Tessa. Not for any of it. Laura's experiment with the open relationship was the beginning of the end, and in a strange way, I was thankful. It pushed me to a place where I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Filing for divorce was like standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain of where I'd land. It was terrifying, but freeing at the same time. I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice, or if I was headed for a crash, but I did it anyway. There were nights when the silence in the house felt deafening. No more late-night arguments. No more passive-aggressive comments over the smallest things. Just empty rooms and the faint hum of the fridge. Some days, that silence felt like peace. Other days, the loneliness crept in, and I questioned whether I was really built to do this alone. But Tessa was there. She was my anchor. She moved in a few months after the divorce was finalized. It just made sense. We were preparing for the baby, and it felt right to take that step together. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Merging two lives is never easy, especially when you're still carrying the weight of a previous one. Some nights, after a long day at work, I'd come home exhausted, and we'd snap at each other over small things. A sock left on the floor, a forgotten grocery item. But we always managed to talk it out. This time, I wasn't going to let those petty arguments build up the way I had with Laura. Money was tight at first. Starting from scratch after a divorce isn't easy. I had to pick up extra consulting gigs, working late into the night to make sure we were comfortable. Tessa had left her job in marketing because the stress wasn't good for the pregnancy, and with me being the only one bringing in income, the pressure mounted. But every time I felt the weight of it all, Tessa was there, reminding me of why we were doing this, keeping me grounded. When Sophie was born, it was a blur of panic, exhaustion, and overwhelming joy. I remember holding Tessa's hand through every contraction, feeling completely helpless, but trying to stay strong for her. When the nurse handed me that tiny, wriggling baby, something shifted inside me. Looking down at Sophie's face, her little eyes scrunched up, screaming, I knew, for the first time in a long time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was a father. The first few months with Sophie were brutal in the best way. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, constant crying. It was chaos. There were days when I thought I might lose my mind. 3 hours of sleep, a pot of stale coffee, and then back at it. But there were also moments that made it all worth it. The first time Sophie smiled at me. The quiet mornings when I rocked her back to sleep, feeling like the luckiest man alive. Every milestone felt like a victory. Her first laugh, her first roll, her first word. Each one was proof that we were doing something right. Raising a baby isn't easy, but having Tessa by my side made all the difference. We leaned on each other in ways I never expected. Sure, we had our share of arguments. Who doesn't when they're sleep-deprived and overwhelmed? But unlike with Laura, every fight with Tessa ended with us finding a solution, not throwing blame. We were a team, and that made all the difference. A year after Sophie was born, I knew it was time to make it official. I didn't plan some big elaborate proposal. It's just not my style. One night, after Sophie had finally gone to sleep, I pulled out a ring I'd been carrying around for weeks and asked Tessa to marry me. She didn't even hesitate. She smiled, kissed me, and said yes. Our wedding was small, just close friends and family. No big spectacle. I'd had the flashy wedding with Laura, and look where that got me. This time, it was simple, real. Standing there with Tessa, holding her hands as we exchanged vows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I wasn't burdened by the past or anxious about the future. I was just happy, but not everyone was thrilled for us. Some of our old neighbors turned their backs, whispering about us like we were the plot of some melodramatic show. I overheard one couple at the store, muttering about how quickly I'd moved on, but honestly, I couldn't have cared less. People love to gossip, especially when they have no idea what it's really like to rebuild your life after it's been shattered. Laura, of course, had her own reaction. The news of the wedding reached her, probably from one of those same gossips, and she didn't take it well. Her texts flooded in, accusing me of destroying her life, insulting Tessa, and demanding to know how I could move on so quickly. I didn't engage. I knew responding would only drag me back into the poisonous mess I'd worked so hard to escape. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better. Sophie was the center of our world now, and watching her grow was the most incredible thing I'd ever experienced. Every new word, every step, each milestone felt like a personal victory, like I was doing something right. And Tessa? She was my anchor. Even when life felt chaotic, she made everything manageable. Parenthood is tough, no doubt. Juggling work, raising a baby, keeping a relationship strong. It's all a balancing act. There were times I fumbled, but the difference now was that I had someone who didn't throw it in my face when I messed up. We worked together. We were building something real. Imperfect, yes, but full of love. Looking back, I see that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal or even the divorce. It was the letting go. Letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the what-ifs. Holding on to that stuff is easy. It's like carrying dead weight, and it can swallow you whole. But eventually, you realize you have a choice. You can hold on to the past, or you can move forward. I chose to move forward. People still ask if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I'd fought harder to save my marriage with Laura, or if I missed the life we had. The answer is always the same. No, I don't regret a thing. Laura's open relationship experiment might have started the unraveling, but it gave me the chance to build something better, something real. Now, when I look at Tessa and Sophie, I know I made the right choice. Life didn't go the way I expected, but it led me to exactly where I needed to be. And for the first time in ages, I'm not just surviving. I'm living. It was bound to happen eventually. You don't spend years of your life with someone and not run into them again, even when you think you've moved past it. I hadn't seen Laura since the divorce was finalized, and I was fine with that. I figured we'd each go our separate ways, me with Tessa and Sophie, and her off doing whatever she did after wrecking her marriage. But the universe had other plans. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I was running errands, grabbing groceries, and hoping to get home in time for Sophie's nap. I was halfway down the produce aisle, distracted by a toddler knocking apples off the shelf, when I heard it, her voice. Well, if it isn't Adam. I froze. That voice, sharp and slightly sweet, still cut through me like a knife. I turned and there she was, Laura. She looked different. Not in a bad way, but different. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a second, I thought she might try to be civil, maybe even make small talk. But of course not. That's not Laura's style. I didn't think I'd run into you here, she said, her arms crossed, her stance daring me to say the wrong thing. Yeah, well, life's full of surprises, I muttered, wishing I could just vanish. She gave me a once-over, her eyes scanning me like she was looking for some sign that I wasn't as happy as she thought I should be. So, I hear you and Tessa are together now, she said, the words dripping with sarcasm. Must be nice to shack up with the neighbor. The jab was expected. I didn't take the bait, though. Yeah, it's great, I said, keeping my voice even. We're good. Sophie keeps us busy, that's for sure. Her smile faltered for a second at the mention of Sophie, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe regret, maybe envy. Good, I said, and for a moment, I almost wanted to keep pushing, but I held back. I didn't need to sink to her level. She crossed her arms tighter, clearly frustrated by my lack of reaction. You moved on quick, she spat, bitterness seeping into her words. Quicker than you did with Ethan. Before I could stop myself, I shot back, well, I wasn't the one who needed permission to explore my freedom. Her eyes blazed with fury. That was different. No, it wasn't, I replied, my voice calm but firm. You wanted freedom. You wanted to explore. I did the same. You don't get to be mad about that. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, like the still air right before a storm. I could see the frustration building behind her eyes, but she had no place left to direct it. You think you've got everything figured out, she said quietly, but there was still venom in her tone. But someday, you'll see that it's not as perfect as you think. I smiled, a real smile, not the sarcastic one I might have given her in the past. Maybe, but if that day comes, at least I'll know I gave it my all. I didn't quit when things got tough, and I didn't betray the people I love. Her jaw clenched, and I knew I'd struck the final blow. She had nothing left to say. Well, I said, turning back to my cart, you have a nice day, Laura. She stood there for a moment, watching me, probably waiting for some final retort that never came. After a few seconds, she huffed and turned, her heels clicking angrily against the tile floor as she walked away. I felt nothing, no anger, no bitterness, no regret, just relief. I knew that whatever we had was long gone, and it felt damn good. I finished my shopping and headed home. When I walked through the door, Tessa was sitting in the living room with Sophie, laughing as our daughter tried to crawl across the carpet. Hey, Tessa called out with a smile. You're back? Yeah, I said, leaning down to kiss her. And it's good to be home.